first say that we're currently on a trend of increasing prison population in this country. Other countries in Western Europe are closing prisons, including Sweden and Denmark, just to name two. But in the United States, the trend now is increasing prison populations. We're now privatizing prisons in the industrial prison complex. And there's two major corporations, one of which is the Corrections Corporation of America, and their 23rd century logo and their whole premise of having lobbyists down at the Capitol in Phoenix, even today, lobbying for harsher penalties, longer jail terms, to essentially commoditize human collateral for corporate profit. I mean, that's the prison industrial complex that we're faced with. If all of the 50 states were ranked as countries, Arizona would be number 6 in the world as the highest, number 6 in per capita incarceration rates. And so how does that relate to what I do? As a justice of the peace, I have some wide discretion in the ability to effect meaningful programs and the ability to spend discretionary dollars to meet one mandate from the Supreme Court, and that is serve the ends of justice. And what that means is, and what that can mean is the ability to involve stakeholders, community partnerships, and the collaborations that I have nurtured and strengthened over the last 13 years. The partnerships are there and on board, ready for these alternatives to punitive justice, and the discretionary funds are available to do that. And I think, in my opinion, the biggest barrier to any meaningful change is in our judiciary itself. And whether that's because of egos in the judiciary, whether that's because of the status quo, whether that's because of these lofty ideals that the judiciary seems to premise itself on, I'm not sure. But in my outreach to the community and my involvement in the community, that's not what I'm hearing from the partnerships and the collaborations that want to be part of this more successful and meaningful and sensible change to justice. The Justice Court has, well, the qualifications for Justice of the Peace is not the same as a U.S. Congressman. 18 years old or 18 to 25 years old and be able to speak and write in the English language. But clearly there are qualifications that make a person eligible for and effective in the position. And as a judge for the last 13 years, I bring that degree of experience, education, and life skills to the position where I believe I'm much better qualified than what is simply taught in law school. And that is, and that's not a criticism of law school, but the outcome of law school is premised on the outcomes of precedents, case law, and fairly narrow focus on questions of legal guilt or innocence, and largely punishment. And I'm just finding that, and we're seeing in our country that is just not making for the enlightened society that we claim to be when it comes to dealing with conflict and the outcomes of conflict. You'll hear during this campaign that, particularly from my opponent, that being an attorney allows my opponent to close cases quicker and save taxpayers tens of thousands of dollars. In fact, he quantified it at one of the most recent meetings, gatherings we were at, and says that if I'm elected, in addition to my salary, taxpayers will be on the hook for an extra $75,000 a year in incarceration costs because I'm not able to take felony changes of plea. But what he doesn't say is that is a proceeding that is the purview of Superior Court. And currently Justice Court is doing some of those proceedings as a courtesy to Superior Court, and that won't change. We'll continue to do that. We'll continue to have attorney pro tems on staff that are available in those rare instances where we are, as a courtesy, handling Superior Court cases. What he also doesn't say is that I have the ability to effect release conditions anytime during the process. Anytime that a defendant is under the jurisdiction of the Justice Court, I can make release conditions, and I do daily, and eager to review release conditions because I believe that if a person is in jail, whether it's a misdemeanor or a felony, and they're a nonviolent offender, and they're not a flight risk, and they're not a risk of harm to themselves or others, they shouldn't be incarcerated in the first place. And so I make those decisions based on those criteria, and won't be any further burden on taxpayers, whether there's an attorney in office or not. And in fact, with my programs in restorative justice and more alternatives to punitive-based justice, the return on the dollar for every dollar invested in restorative justice programs, non-punitive based justice programs, then that return is between $4 and $8, depending on the program. I've been endorsed by 5 Navajo Nation chapter houses. We spent the last 30 weekends on the Navajo Nation, and really have embraced, and they have embraced the vision and the plan that I have for better outreach up on Navajo and in our remote communities. That's one of the mandates too of Justice 2030, is to have access to justice for all of Coconino County, not just Flagstaff. I have people coming from Tonalea, 100 miles one way, to address 2 and 3 pre-trial court proceedings before the matter even goes to trial. That's a tremendous burden for people of lower socioeconomic means and largely folks that don't have access to transportation. It's resulting in warrants that are being issued out of the Justice Court right now for failure to comply with terms of a sentence that were very punitive to begin with and that could have been resolved much more favorably and much more success-based. And so I'll review those cases and make appropriate decisions as to whether we can convert some of those punitive sanctions to more restorative community service, community restitution-based outcomes. So that's much of my platform that I have been trying to convey to the public. And so 2 important dates coming up. A week from tomorrow starts early voting. July 31st starts the permanent early voting mail-outs of the ballots. If you're an independent voter or your friends are independent voters and they haven't requested a ballot yet from the county elections, you can still do so, I believe, up until Friday of this week. You can request it. And if you don't get your ballot, you can go to the elections office, and there's also a few voting areas around the county at the satellite sites, and you can vote early on site. And you walk in, if you're an independent, you select your ballot, Democrat or primary or Libertarian, and you can vote there on site, turn it in, and it's done. The next important date, of course, is the primary. My race will be decided in the, go ahead, Sharon.
But I think you want them to pick independents to pick the Democratic ballot because that's the one that you'll be on.
Absolutely.
You won't be on the Republican primary ballot.
That's right. Pick the Democratic ballot because my race will likely be decided in the primary.
Right.
The 2 of us that are currently qualified for the ballot are Democrats, and so it's as Kristen's dad characterized the other day, this is a blood sport, winner take all.
It is.
But there's been a little wrinkle. Go ahead,
on that issue too, if you're going to take an early ballot, leave it there. Vote and leave it, because if you try to take it to the polling place, or if you try to take an early ballot and then go to the polling place, it messes everything up. They probably will not allow you to vote, which they shouldn't be doing.
Or it becomes a provisional.
A provisional, which makes it even worse. So the best thing to do, if you're going to take an early ballot, mark it and vote right there, so you won't have to mess with it. And then we get all those votes locked in.
Right.
Because we don't know what you 2 are going to do, between now and, I don't know if you guys will get out of hand with that.
Vote early and often.
The actual primary date is less than 5 weeks. It's August 26th. That was 5 weeks from yesterday. Who's counting? And so those dates are important to keep in mind. And there's now a new candidate who is filed as a write-in, as a Libertarian. A young fellow, 24-year-old political science student from NAU. He needs 13 write-in ballots on the Libertarian primary ballot in order to qualify for the general.